Horror games have many ways that they can release the tension built up by a scary situation. You can go from fighting for your life against a horde of Spanish villagers to relaxing in a safe room, numb to the danger that awaits. You might struggle in a chase sequence that leads to your death, but you respawn at a checkpoint feeling a little better now that you know what to expect. There are even cutscenes that completely remove the onus from the player and allow the animators and actors to take control of a dangerous situation. There's nothing inherently wrong with these things, because it would be impossible for developers to continually stack fear in the heart of the player without any reprieve. And even if it were possible, it would not be enjoyable for hours on end. With that being said, we can turn our heads to an indie game that refuses to give players any sort of respite, but is short enough that it doesn't overstay its welcome. As soon as you spawn in, the game begins to stretch a rubber band of tension that only snaps when we meet our doom, after which the process begins once more. As you can tell by the title, this game is Monstrum, and it's fantastic for anyone that enjoys survival horror. This game sat in my wishlist on Steam for over 2 years, and I wish I had bought it before making the video that gave this channel any semblance of relevance. The reason being is because the game makes excellent use of the roaming monster mechanic that I described in that video. But what is Monstrum all about? How does it work? Why am I even talking about this 8-year-old game? Each of these questions will be answered in due course. After loading into the game, we wake up and find ourselves in a small, grimy bathroom with a rusted sink and a decaying toilet. A large metal locker is blocking the door. Exiting the room through the locker, it crashes down behind us, forbidding our access to the only safe room in the entire game. The first room that we enter takes the shape of a small office. In it, we find a flashlight and a glow stick, which will prove to be invaluable tools. Exiting the room, we take our first steps into the cold, metal labyrinth that the entire game takes place in. Our only objective is to find out where we are. It becomes apparent very quickly that we are trapped on an abandoned cargo ship with limited power, limited resources, and no straightforward way to leave. The ship is abandoned, yes, but we aren't alone. Even if these halls weren't being stalked by monsters, escaping the ship would be far from straightforward. For starters, it is massive. This sprawling vessel is made up of a main deck, lower decks, and upper decks, each of which are home to dozens of rooms and hallways. Even if you aren't claustrophobic, you will feel their weight closing in on you as you scramble for items and resources. Searching the ship, you will eventually come across the 3 modes of escape available. The first of which is a submarine, but it is in a state of disrepair and lacks power. In order to transform it into a valid means of transportation, you must find a new battery, a headlight, a welding kit to fix its side panel, and a fuse to recharge and release the submarine. Unfortunately, there isn't a submarine repair storage room, and you will instead have to search the ship for these items separately. The same is true for the helicopter, which requires keys, bolt cutters, and 2 cans of fuel. The final means of escape is a life raft, which is the easiest to repair. It needs only a roll of duct tape, a fuse, and a chain. The quest for items might sound similar to something like Slender Man, but this comparison is downright unfair. Inventory space is limited and can only be increased by a backpack, which forces you to make difficult decisions in regards to what you will carry. It is not uncommon that you will find yourself picking up a submarine headlight, the helicopter keys, and the duct tape, before having to abandon some of them as you find a matching part. The 3 escape routes are in separate sections of the ship, which makes it dangerous to visit each of them when you find a new part. But what is the threat that I speak of? During your traversal of the ship, you might turn a corner only to find a surveillance camera pointed directly at you. It begins beeping as it scans you, before turning on a screeching siren that echoes through the ship. Before you can react, the booming footsteps can be heard from down the hall. As they get closer, the hulking body of the brute comes into view. Its molten core staring at you through its gaping yellow eyes. You can flee to a nearby room, locking yourself behind a metal door, but this is of no use. It smashes through the door, showing just how vulnerable that you are. Paralyzed by fear, you watch as it uses its gooning arm to hoist you into the air, before snapping your neck. The Brute is just one of the 3 monsters that effectively turn this ship into a floating metal coffin. Unlike the other 2, it is identifiable by its loud footsteps and glowing orange light emitted from its mouth and eyes. By charging at you like a linebacker, this monster is the fastest of the 3, which is surprising due to its sheer size. In theory, it is not fast enough to catch up to the player, but in practice, chases often play out differently. We are forced to hide and use distractions to survive, because fire and the flare gun are of no use against the Brute. Then there's the Hunter. After setting off a security alarm, the Hunter isn't kind enough to telegraph its presence with loud footsteps. Instead, it will emerge from an egg sac in the wall or crawl out of a nearby vent. Then we can hear its slimy feet slapping on the ground as it walks or crawls towards us. In appearance, the Hunter has transparent skin that can be compared only to the elastic skin of a jellyfish. Behind it is a skeleton that looks human, but its disgusting jaw opening like a flower below its black beady eyes prevent us from being fooled for a second. It has elongated arms, legs, and fingers, which help it skulk around the ship with unmatched skill at traversal. Unlike the other monsters, it is tethered to the player and will move through walls while it waits for the player to make a mistake. Finally, there's the Fiend. If the Brute could be compared to a giant molten rock, and the Hunter could be compared to a jellyfish, then the Fiend can only be compared to a demon. With long, decayed teeth that look more like talons, and small, soulless eyes resembling the void. Its skin looks like dried flesh that has been stretched over something that was not meant to wear it. It has spiked shoulders and bony arms, with its legs fused together without feet. Instead of charging toward the player, or crawling from a nearby vent, the Fiend will float, surrounded by a strange purple aura. The only warning sign that you receive is the flickering of lights, which makes the flashlight a powerful tool. What sets it apart from the other 2 is its ability to immobilize the player from a distance, using its powers to slowly kill you. It goes without saying that none of these monsters can be killed. Our only means of self-defense are shooting them with a flare gun, stunning them with a fire extinguisher, or using a lighter and gasoline to start a fire. These items are not guaranteed and have varying effects depending on the monster that you are up against. From the moment that you exit the first safe room, you are thrust into a game of cat and mouse as you scour the ship for a means of escape. Since only one of the 3 monsters spawns each game, there is a period of uncertainty in the beginning because you are unsure of which you are facing. Even after you find out, whether that be from seeing it firsthand or hearing it telegraph its presence, there is no way of knowing where it will be or how it will behave. If you carelessly frolic throughout the ship, sprinting into rooms and not considering an escape route, you can easily become cornered and killed. But the monsters do not simply rely on cornering you to be effective killers. Even if you manage to make it into a room and hide in a locker, they will happily check the available hiding spots. Not in a scripted way like Outlast, where they will always open the wrong locker, but it seems effectively random in this game. The Brute is the most likely to give up its search quickly, while the other 2 will sometimes open every hiding spot, pulling you from one and tossing you to the ground. The chases play out differently to Outlast or Amnesia as well. Monstrum has no safety nets. A death means a return to 0, whereas the other games will simply send you back to the most recent checkpoint, with new knowledge of the map and the objectives. Unfortunately for you, a death won't even grant you such knowledge, as the cargo ship is procedurally generated. This means that every time you start a new game, you'll be forced to genuinely search the map for the items that you require, as if for the first time. Sure, the escape routes remain the same, but the item locations vary greatly. This procedural generation is the foundation for Monstrum's horror, and works perfectly with the roaming monster mechanic. Each time you wake up in that cramped bathroom, you have no idea what awaits you once you leave its safety. In other horror games, you come to learn the best routes to evade a monster and successfully hide. You might even learn the pathways that the enemy will take after searching the room, which makes it easier to sneak past and continue to your objective. In Monstrum, The only thing that is certain is that you must find your way off this ship, or else it will become your grave. You are forced to scour every room, because there is no telling where that submarine battery will be, or where the flare gun is hiding. Games never last long enough for you to internalize the layout of the procedurally generated ship, which makes you rely on pure instinct when in chase. The labyrinthian design persists, and there are plenty of dead ends and traps that could lead to your doom. But it is ultimately the return to zero that makes this game so intense. The monsters are terrifying, and the search for items can build tension, but the fact that all your progress is lost upon dying makes it all the more horrifying. Once you have found 2 matching items for an escape route, the tension increases, because those matching parts signify a step in the direction of escape. By the time you find a third, escape is so close that you can taste it, so when you hear those pounding footsteps down the hall, or the slapping of gelatin on the wall, or the sinister hum of the fiend's demonic aura, you feel so much more dread. Because again, death isn't a return to a checkpoint, death means starting over again. The procedurally generated ship, the roguelike formula, the monsters that refuse to die, and the complicated escape routes all work together to deprive the player of peace. As soon as you leave the starting room, Monstrum sinks its teeth into you and doesn't let go until you escape, or die trying.